Welcome back, everyone, to the property podcast today. I'm your host, Lee Dahill. I've got Kristjan Byfield on the show. Now, Kristjan will hopefully remember this, but many moons ago, I had the privilege of going to the pre-launch event of the Depositary. I remember being in the room, seeing the kind of very first demo of before it went to market. And I was very grateful that, I got the invite and I loved being there. Do you remember my little face in the room, Kristjan?
I remember you well being there, mate. It was a very special little day. That was, the culmination of over 3 years' work.
Yep.
I remember that day very, very well, my friend.
Good. Now, Kristjan, let me hand over to you to do a quick introduction before I ask you some agency-related questions and some depository-related questions. So, Kristjan, for the people that don't know who you are, which is only a few, tell us about you and give us an introduction.
My name's Kristjan Byfield. I am an agent, a tenant, and a software provider. So I have been renting in London for 24 years. I've been an estate and letting agent for 22 of those. I started my lettings agency with my business partner, Anne Deckers, back in May 2004. We've just celebrated 20 years of base. About 4 years ago, we decided to go into the merry land of PropTech, and we built a product kind of really primarily for our own agency, but then opened that up to the market. So called the Depositary, and that launched about 4 years ago. And then alongside that, I get involved with things. I've sat on the Zoopla Lettings Advisory Board for a couple of years. I get heavily involved with the Lettings Industry Council. I sat on the board of the UK PropTech Association for a couple of years. And generally keep myself pretty busy, but I'm very, very passionate about our industry as agents, the evolution of the PRS in a sustainable manner, and the role tech has to play in a lot of that. So that's me. Heidi ho.
Brilliant. Kristjan, my first question, I'm going to kind of do this in two stages, as I said, one on the agency side. So I want to start with that. And what are you seeing that's happening in the sort of London marketplace?
So look, we're definitely out of that bonkers. We've obviously had kind of 3 or 4 years of insanity, obviously, because we had COVID, which was absolutely terrifying for a lot of us. And with us being a London agent, and particularly a lot of our stock is in the city fringes. We felt the downturn of the market particularly hard. We saw our rents drop probably 30 or 40% in some cases, with huge voids. And then, like the rest of the country, we saw that massive pendulum swing back the other way, where we had kind of 18 months of bun fights over every single listing we put on the market. We really noticed that tailing off back in December. So we saw that total insanity come out of the market, because I think what we were seeing before was every listing we took to market, we would get 40, 50, 60 inquiries almost instantly. We're now obviously still finding the lower end of the market, the entry level part of the market does still have that kind of fever pitch. And that's just the lack of supply of anything that most people would consider affordable. But for the rest of the market, and we operate, I would consider ourselves kind of a mid-market operator. It's definitely cooled off a bit. Pricing a property right, getting your marketing strategy right is increasingly important. Coming back to the good old skills of, God forbid, picking up a phone and actually generating viewings and generating interest, that is coming back into play. And I know that's caught a few people, both on the sales and letting side, out. But no, I mean, generally, look, the PRS in London isn't going anywhere. I don't think it's really going anywhere nationwide. It's a substantial and essential part of our housing provision in this country. And no solution is going to happen overnight. I think most people believe that the solution to ease things is building the right type of properties at scale, and a lot of that being social. But we also all know that Labour aren't going to suddenly build 500,000 homes in a year. So that isn't going to change overnight. So yeah, we're seeing a more normalized market. Rents are still very strong. So we're generally seeing our highest rents. I mean, we've had a strong year so far at base. I think we're 7 months in now. I believe we've had like 4 best ever months, including July that we just finished. Marginally, we're not talking massive increases, but you know, marginal gains on months. So you know, still a very dependable, very reliable market. I think in lettings, it's still about getting the right things right. I think now more than ever, particularly with the Labour government coming in, there's going to be a huge amount of educating and rationalising needed as agents. There's a lot of landlords out there starting to panic, and they're panicking largely because of the way the media is framing a lot of what is going on. Some people, I think it was last weekend, I did a little post which actually got a lot of engagement within the industry, because the Times had done a big piece on, you know, basically what does this mean for the PRS now with Section 21 going, focusing on that really, like it was something new, and wasn't meant to happen 5 years ago. So there's still a lot of hysteria, and I think it's crucial that agents educate themselves to understand the realities of the changes that are coming down the pipeline, and to get comfortable with being that voice of reason for their clients. Because if we're not careful, you know, kind of what the media is saying about a large exodus, you know, it's going to be a self-fulfilling prophecy. And so, yeah, I think we've got a really important role to play, but ultimately the PRS is going nowhere, you know. So the people who navigate this well, and guide their clients safely through this kind of slightly, I think it's necessarily a scary but uncertain times, I think we'll do very well and come out the other end very well. And I think, you know, today's modern marketing channels of video and social media really lend themselves really well to agents being able to kind of get some really good, strong messaging out there, and like I said, bring some level-headed sensibilities to some of what's being said in the media.
Wicked. I think that's some great advice there, Kristjan. And you sort of touched on it, and I want to ask about it, which is in terms of demand that we were seeing in tenant inquiries per property. I believe, and don't quote me on this, but I believe the latest figure was 17 inquiries per property. What are you seeing as of sort of right now?
Well, I think, as we all know, national averages never mean anything. So, I mean, again, even thinking about our portfolio, as I touched on earlier, it depends on the property and the location and the price point. And that's just in London, let alone nationwide.
Yes.
Like I said, anything kind of entry level for us, anything coming in at what we consider entry level rents, which is probably now around kind of 12 to 1,500 a month. Those we're still getting high levels of volumes of inquiries about, probably 20 to 30, maybe more on particular properties. But then as we travel up the market, that's definitely getting squeezed. In the mid-market, like I said, where we really operate, our average rent's kind of around 2.5 a month. Around that sort of area, we're seeing price being very, very important. And I'm increasingly preaching to clients now actually about, if anything, kind of leaning towards underpricing, entice more interest back into the property. Because what we're seeing now is that if you do overprice a property, you get very little to no interest. The market has become a lot more price sensitive, and you know, who can blame them? We're all living through what we're living through at the moment. Everyone seems to be finding finances very tight, coming from all sides. So, you know, that was always going to creep into the rental market, and it has. So, yeah, look, I think I can't really comment on it as a national average, but I would say, yeah, probably overall, we would probably be looking maybe slightly under there, probably sort of 13, 14, 15 inquiries of properties on average. But yeah, like I said, I don't really know what averages, even within our business, averages don't mean that much. Because like I said, the supply for an entry level 1 bed versus a 3-bed penthouse is, you know, always going to be kind of juxtapositioned, really.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, Kristjan. And I know that those sort of national averages are not exactly the most useful because of the fact everywhere is different, and obviously London versus, say for example Norwich and other things. So it's interesting to hear what you're seeing, from London. And I do agree that that is a nice way to look at it, in the sense of the price point of the market and getting that price right for the tenants, in terms of the interest and things around the property. So I think that's another good advice. And I want to, in your introduction, you said about the panel you work with Zoopla.
Yep.
This month, I saw recommending mandatory training for letting agents. What would be your suggested differences in this recommendation compared to what Property Mark and the Regulation of Property Agents Working Party have been doing already?
God, I mean, I on a technical basis, I'm not sure I could really pick out between what we've pledged as a board and what Property Mark, or what the kind of guidelines are around ROPA. I know, seeing some of the comments, although it did seem to be though mainly landlords, looking at some of the comments when that all got announced on the industry media last week. I think the way we view it is that we see that 80-90% of agents are already doing this. I think there was an interesting kind of theme that came through some of the more balanced comments, shall we say, on those articles, which was basically like, oh, I already train my team to make sure they have the knowledge and they have the skill set. So why would I need this in addition? And I think that's not what we're saying. If you already invest in training your team in technical knowledge, technical standards, and then also upskilling them in terms of knowledge around marketing or sales techniques or managerial techniques, whatever, we're not saying there's anything on top of that. Those are the agents. You're already doing what you should be doing. Just the difference would be that it would be more carefully tracked, or you might need to do certain tick box training to tick certain kind of syllabuses. But I think for agents who already invest a moderate amount in training, I don't think they would actually see any greater burden on the business, either financially or time-wise. And actually, I think if regulation was mandated, we should, in theory, see training come down, because everyone has to have it. There will be a greater demand, which will lead to greater competition, which typically leads to lower prices. I think, as always, the battle for our industry, both as agents and as landlords, is we are all tarnished by the ones who don't train, by the ones who don't educate, by the ones who frankly just don't care. And I think, as primarily a group of agents, I think that we feel this is one of the easiest ways to help eliminate that segment of operators within the marketplace. Will it be perfect? Will it eliminate every crappy agent and every nasty landlord in the land? Absolutely not. Every industry has its duckers and divers who like to tread a fine line between what's legal and not. What it will do is it will reduce those, because at the moment, as we all know, anyone can open an estate or letting agent tomorrow. All you need is, CMP and an ombudsman membership, and off you go. And nowadays, with lots of agents working from home, you don't even need the requirements of needing a shop like you used to with a lot of the property portals. You couldn't sign up unless you had a commercial premises. So there is such a low level of entry for our industry. And whilst there is a benefit to that, we have had some really interesting, lots of people have come into our industry and have approached it from a different mindset, because they haven't necessarily been trained to think about agency in a very specific way. I think ultimately, if you're creatively minded, being trained and achieving a degree or some sort of certification isn't gonna take that away from you. But I think it's just, ultimately, it's another step about improving the overall standards of our industry, and hopefully in doing so, raising the public perception. I think whilst we continue to have an industry where literally anyone can set up an agency tomorrow, and whatever they do, success or more often than not failure, lands on the shoulders of our industry. I think until we start setting some sort of limitations on that, we're going to struggle to get out of that bottom 3, bottom 5 kind of perceived jobs, because like I said, there is no qualification, there's no barrier to entry, anyone can be it. So I think fundamentally I don't see it as an extra burden on a decent agent. Any decent agency out there is investing in training in some shape or form, and so that won't change.
And why do you think the last government effectively ignored agent regulation, and the new government has not been interested enough to put it in its manifesto?
So why did the last government? I mean, there's a lot of questions we could ask about the last government. We could be here for quite a long time. I mean, probably a much bigger question would probably be, why did they fail to get rid of Section 21 after getting royal ascendancy back in 2019? Look, there's a lot of what I like to call clickbait politics going on in the PRS at the moment. There's a lot of loud voices out there, a lot of action groups, a lot of charities who get a lot of column inches, and tend to have the ear of a lot of political people or political influencers. There's a distinct lack of kind of context there. I think we've seen an array of things come into the marketplace, and I still think of recent changes, I still think the most damaging thing was Section 24, the massive tax changes around mortgage regulation. And I mean, honestly, what government ever more heavily taxes the providing of homes than they do the hospitality sector? And I'm talking about obviously the disparity between the PRS and the short let market. The fact that we brought in Section 24 for housing providers, but Section 24 wasn't applied to holiday homes, I mean, that in my eyes is just one of the most mental pieces of tax legislation ever. And we now wonder why rents are escalating, what the primary driver for landlords is, and Section 24 is very much sat at the centre of that. So look, the previous government, I mean, my God, they had prime ministers change so often. I doubt they even knew their left foot from their right foot half the time. So I don't know. I mean, and the prime ministers made the housing ministers look well, or rather, I should say, the housing ministers made the prime ministers look positively long term. So look, I don't think the Conservatives were ever going to knit together a cohesive housing strategy when it was unusual for a housing minister to stay in the role for more than 6 months at a time. And Labour coming in, I think we all kind of knew what we were going to get with Labour, which was that any new party coming in, that first 90 days is huge. Yes, they want to be able to turn around after the first 90 days and reel off a list of their achievements, particularly when you've had a government that's failed to really do much of any real note the last year or so. And so I think we all knew that if the Conservatives didn't push through the Renters Reform Bill, which again I think was very weak of them to kind of chuck that out with wash up. But yeah, moving that over to the Labour side, they were always going to want to get something through in that first 90 days, so they can kind of turn around to the renter community and be like, here you are, we've done more in 45 days, 60 days, 90 days than the Conservatives achieved for you in 14 years. It's a very strong message. I think the hope is, and look, before wash up happened, before the election, we did have a Renters Reform Bill, which was generally supported by both sides. I think the distinct hope from us all is that very much goes through in a very similar format to where that had kind of got to. I think the cautiousness with a lot of us is that either things will be rushed through for that quick win, or Labour will feel the need to kind of strengthen or tilt the onus more towards the tenant on some of those things. So I think we have to be cautious about what happens with that. Section 21 was always going to be the thing they were going to rush through. The Conservatives' red herring about saying, we wouldn't put through the removal of Section 21 until we'd assessed the courts. Well, anyone who doesn't have a grasp of what's going on with the court system in the UK as a whole and how massively underfunded it is. I mean, we've got people facing serious crimes who are waiting years for their attackers to be put in front of a judge. As serious as we all think rent arrears and antisocial behaviour is, I don't know if that trumps serious and violent crime. I think there's a huge thing of at what point is the government going to be able to justify turning around and solely investing in a housing court for the purpose of supporting housing when there are so many other serious issues in the court system. So the government using a court review as a reason to kind of kick Section 21 removal down the alley was always very weak. And it was always going to be one that I don't think any of us expected Labour to tag on to that excuse. So, look, Section 21 is going to go. But I mean, I've been talking about this since back in 2018, 2019, when it was first proposed and went through to royal ascendancy. It's not the terrifying onslaught that the media would have everyone believe. 85% of all tenancies are ended by the tenant. So straight away, we're only talking about 15% of the market, and we're not talking about anything close to 15% of the market, because rent increases will still be allowed on an annual basis. You'll still be allowed the right to occupy. You'll still be allowed the right to sell. Now, we don't know exactly what that framework is going to be. There might be extended notice periods or whatever. But the main reasons that a landlord removes a tenant will still be there. Yes, if your tenant goes into rent arrears or if there's antisocial behaviour or breach of contract, you now won't have the relative ease of going through a Section 21, but you will still have the protections of a Section 8. Yes, do we expect that to increase the burden and the wait times on courts? Absolutely. But I think very simply what will become really marketplace standard for all agents and all landlords will be the adoption of a rent warranty and legal expenses warranty. Lots of agents already use these now for the cost of, God, what are they usually? They're not expensive products. They're usually about kind of 250, 300, 350 pounds for the year. And for that, you've got rent protection for rents up to $2,500 a month. You usually have 6 to 12 months rent cover. You usually have 6-figure legal expenses cover, which also covers the removal, that covers the removal of a tenant. So yes, these things will take longer, but I think it will just become industry standard that every applicable tenancy, and you can't put these products on every type of tenancy, but every applicable tenancy will just very simply have a rent and legal expenses warranty, so that if you get into that situation, it's going to have to be the insurer's problem. Ultimately they're going to pick up that $2,500 a month bill. Actually, that's kind of what we want to happen, because insurance is always underwritten by a bigger and bigger insurer. So somewhere in that chain, if that becomes a huge thing with a large level of claims, you're eventually going to have a very large commercial insurance entity that suddenly goes, hold on a minute, and then they will start doing their own actions and petitioning government and doing research into this, that, and the other to help drive a shift and to help support the court. So, nothing's going to change overnight, but, I think really removal of Section 21 is largely only going to impact about 2 to 3% of the market. And those ones with the right insurance and protection in place, the impact will be negligible, if at all noticeable.
Okay. Okay. And I want to ask you on the high cost put on landlords. So I believe a year ago you signed a letter to the then Housing Secretary Michael Gove,
Yeah.
criticising the high cost put on landlords, including raising the minimum EPC levels to C for rental properties. Now Labour looks set to do the same. What will this mean for the already sort of battered buy-to-let sector?
Look, I mean, I do think we like to over dramatize
Hmm.
how battered the PRS are. Like, don't get me wrong, it's been a tough journey, but let's not forget that half of landlords out there, from when I last looked, approximately half of all buy-to-let properties have no mortgage.
Hmm.
So I talk about Section 24 being a huge impact. Section 24 doesn't impact half the market because there is no mortgage in place there. When we look at things like EPCs, again, I felt like there was a lot of over dramatization around that, because when you look at it just as a simple headline of all properties must be C or you can't let them out, the legislation wasn't that simple. There were a myriad of exemptions. You could, if your head lease didn't allow it, if you were in a conservation area, if it's a listed building, it gets you out of a lot of those things. There was also a spend cap. So, I think it was hyped around the media like it was going to be some unending liability where a landlord could end up having to spend 50 or 100 grand on their house to meet that energy efficiency rating. Nonsense. I think the cap was like 5 or 10 grand or something. It wasn't a very high cap. So yes, a landlord would have to invest that. But landlords should be reinvesting into their properties anyway. So as long as a landlord is strategizing that, and again, the changes to EPC ratings, it's nothing new. This has been talked about for a decade, and when you look at society as a whole, cars, our homes, our appliances, everything is about becoming more energy efficient.
Hmm.
Why we don't think that is going to be applied to homes? Of course, it's going to be applied to homes. So I think there's a lot of scaremongering. There's a lot of worrying about these things. At the same time, there have been real impacts to the market, and to then, which is causing this squeeze. It has caused the market to tighten. There are
Hmm.
more and more people coming into the rental sector, so that disparity of supply and demand are getting squeezed, and landlords are generally facing increased costs. And there's a likelihood that capital gains tax will be looked at or increased around investment properties as well. I mean, all of these things ultimately put pressure on landlords finding their margin. They've got to find their margin somewhere. It's got to be a viable business. And if you're
Yes.
taxing their profits heavily, then then they have to keep growing those to get their margin. And so that leads us to the situation we are now, where rents are higher than ever.
Yes.
And obviously, London, there's been strong growth, but London has always been kind of a premium market anyway, so there's no surprise. But when you look at some parts around the country where rents have more than doubled over the last couple of years, I mean, they have gone absolutely insane.
Hmm.
That is a real consequence. And then you look at areas down the southwest, like Cornwall and the such like, who've been had their market turned on its head through holiday homes. The huge uptake of properties being acquired, or PRS homes being flipped into the holiday market. So look, there's lots of pressures. I think government, whoever it is, Conservative or Labour, can't keep attacking landlords and the PRS and
No.
keep increasing their costs and burden, and then also blame them for rents going up and the market becoming tighter.
Yes.
There's going to have to be some kind of meeting in the ground, and that meeting in the middle. And that's why I really adore a lot of the work Ben Beadle's done as head of the NRLA. I think over the past few months, year or so, really, particularly since the Renters Reform Bill was announced, I think Ben has done a brilliant job of doing his best to represent his landlords as a key stakeholder, but without without that singular mindset. And I know there are some landlords who disagree, some landlord members of NRLA who wanted him to be a lot more militant and aggressive on behalf of landlords. But I think what Ben understands is that the PRS does need to evolve. It's not perfect. You know, there are things that are not good for tenants, but equally there are things that are not good for landlords. And a good and healthy PRS will evolve in a way that hopefully benefits both, or at least doesn't overly disadvantage one or the other. So I've really admired Ben's approach to that kind of very level-headed middle ground.
Yes.
And, you know, we march on. The PRS will still be here in 10, 20 years' time. You know, I'm sure there will still be people moaning about what's great, what's bad about it, and what's good about it. I'm sure whilst landlords still have to pay a penny of tax, there will always be too much tax. And whilst landlords make a penny of profit, tenants will always moan that landlords make too much profit. So, you know, I don't think ultimately those viewpoints are going to change. But yeah, the PRS isn't going anywhere.
Okay. I want to talk to you about, you know, I said there's two parts to the interview, and I said I want to talk to you about the agency side first. So I kind of feel like I've got those questions all across now, and I want to ask you about the depository and you know, how it was born and that kind of thing. So how does it work? How was it born?
So, the depository, for those who don't know, is kind of a streamlining and automation tool. And what we try and do is we try and make a tenancy conclusion process as really hands-off as possible for an agent and their landlord. And yeah, we, you know, just through the software we built and the partner integrations we have, we try and do as much of the heavy lifting as possible, really just to make it a much easier, nicer, cleaner process for agents, but also for tenants as well, to really understand the journey, to make it easier for them to know what they need to do when, and hopefully help them get their deposits back quicker. And this all came out of our team sitting down and brainstorming the business. It's something that we do at least once a year. We sit down as an entire team and we just pick apart the business. We do it one-to-one, and then we sit down as a group, and we just talk through, you know, with every member of the team, what they love, what they hate. You know, what is the task that they dread when they come in and they know they've got a particular task to do that day that they're dreading. What is it, and why do they dread it? Because I think job satisfaction is hugely important to us.
Yes.
And by understanding what they don't like, you can then understand why they don't like it and whether you can do anything about it. And back in 2016, when we came up with the idea for the depository, this was the interesting thing was this was a unanimous bit of feedback that came through from pretty much the entire team, our property managers and our admins, was that the end of tenancy process was just horrible. It was clunky. Like a lot of agents out there now, you know, we've embedded a lot of tech throughout our kind of rental journey, from marketing and onboarding all the way through maintenance and accounting and blah, blah, blah. And there was no one doing anything for the conclusion process. But when we looked at it, what we found was it takes a lot of time. It's a very frustrating and infuriating process for our team. But actually, 90% of what they do has virtually no value. You know, they will send an email out explaining what a tenant needs to do. They will send emails and make calls chasing a tenant to book in this, to do that, to send in this, to respond to that. And yeah, who wants a member of staff doing that? I mean, I think one of the things we always look at with agency is if your best outcome is succeed or fail, but there's nothing more than that, then that's a really horrible task to put on someone's plate, because at best they do a menial thing and they've done it. But if they don't, they could have missed out a critical piece of communication that could cause huge problems down the line. But there's no skill set involved with just sending an email, particularly if it's automated or templated or whatever. And that is exactly the kind of stuff that software and machinery should be taking off an agency's hands. So, that was really where it started. We had a quick look around and a quick chat with people in the marketplace, and quickly established that no one was really looking at that part of the market. I think the only thing really happening at that time was companies like Canopy and Flatfare and Zero Deposit were starting to kind of form around the same time. So again, a similar thing. They kind of felt that things weren't quite working the way they were structured. And that's the journey we've been on since then. I mean, we were adamant we didn't want to, there was a lot of money being thrown around 8 years ago. You just had to whisper the word prop tech and people came knocking at your door with silly offers. And we took a very considered stance that we weren't going to raise any money until we absolutely had to. And 8 years later, we haven't raised a single penny of investment. And whilst I'm not necessarily saying there's anything wrong with investment, in fact, actually, the longer we go on this journey, the more I understand the role that investment does play in the evolution of a tech solution. I've also seen a lot of companies where raising money too early puts pressure on the wrong elements of the business. I'm a true believer that the quality of the product ultimately determines whether a business succeeds or fails. You can put brilliant salespeople around it, et cetera, but if the piece that you're selling is crap, you're ultimately doomed. And what we didn't want to do was see too much emphasis go on growth and market share rather than building a really quality product. And look, tenancy conclusions, they sound really easy, but it's a really, really nuanced space. You can sit down and talk to 10 letting agents, and they will all do that process slightly differently for slightly different reasons. They will all have a slightly different viewpoint on what it's like dealing with their tenants. They'll all have a slightly different viewpoint on how their landlords react to certain things, how reasonable they are about proposals and negotiations and all this sort of stuff. So it's a really complex and nuanced space. And 8 years after the concept later, we're still working that out. We're still refining our product and getting there. But we've got a growing community of agents who love our product. Some of my favorite agents in the country use our platform, and what's really important to me is we're one of their team's favorite pieces of tech. And when we're being used by agents that use a lot of tech in their business, that means a lot. I still get mystified. We still have, hand on heart, we still have the odd agent turn around who, signs up with us, does 6 to 12 months and turns around and goes, do you know what? It doesn't really sit right in our business, not really seeing the benefit. I still find that fascinating, how we can have two polar opposite viewpoints within the same sector, within the same industry. But yeah, it's a really exciting journey. It's been a fascinating journey to go on. I definitely have a lot more empathy and sympathy for tech companies now. When I previously would bark down the phone about something not working or something not there, or why doesn't it do this, or why on earth does it do that, and I now have a greater appreciation of what that journey is like, and the fact that can't you just do this? I mean, my God, my software team banned me from using the word just. It feels like 2 decades ago. I still slipped it in there just to wind them up, to be fair. But
You've just got to.
You gotta exactly keep them on their toes. So
that's good.
So it's good. So that's that's the depository. We've really built that. I mean, we built it to try and benefit everyone. I said, our customers are agents and large scale corporate landlords. And obviously that is who we see the primary benefit for, and that is to massively automate and streamline that process. We also, because we're the first company to really digitize that entire journey, we can now create an array of reports and data that no one else has. There is no other CRM or that has the amount of data and data points we have around tenancy conclusions. You know, we've got tons of data around time to close. We literally track how many days every step of the process takes, and that means from an applicant registering on our system to arranging their checkout, booking their clean, responding to negotiations. We know a breakdown of what all the deductions are, what sort of rounds of negotiation that goes through. We know something really unique for us that the deposit schemes don't get to see, and I find a fascinating piece of data, is that we know what are proposed as deductions versus what is agreed. Whereas deposit schemes only ever see that final figure, we get to see that fascinating insight into proposed deductions versus final agreed deductions. And one of our reports is generating a report just on that as a percentage. So for businesses who really want to understand on a granular level every single part of their business, we give huge insights into what was kind of a slightly dark art part of the lettings process, really. And it's a crucial part. I think a lot of agents make the mistake of dropping the ball in the end of tenancy process. A lot of agents look after their landlords and tenants brilliantly throughout the journey, and then they get stuck in this very turgid, slightly contentious end of tenancy process where it feels like you're doing work and not getting paid because the tenancy's already ended. There can easily be this psychology of like, oh, I'm not getting paid for this stuff. Actually, you already have been. But so many agents are making the mistake of having a great relationship with their tenants and landlords, and then particularly with their tenants at the end, wrapping it all up with this really rubbish experience of poor communication, a tenant feeling that proposed deductions are either totally illegitimate or massively overinflated, and then also that process being massively drawn out, and that adding a huge amount of stress and unpleasantness to everyone's journey, really, including the PMs handling it. And so there's a lot of tenants walking away from agents who, had that end of tenancy experience been better, they'd have left very happy and with a very positive impression of that brand. And sadly, there's a lot of tenants who would have done that, but because that end is so poor, they end up having had a very happy 3, 4, 5 year tenancy with an agent. They're walking away with this very toxic impression of an agency, and that will last a lifetime. You know, and I think that's hugely important that agents understand. You know, the perception is that a lot of people, most people start as tenants, you know, and evolve into buyers and eventually landlords. So it's really important that lasting impression you give of people of your agency. You know, guess what? If a tenant leaves feeling like you've ripped them off and duped them and ignored them, even if the 3 years before was fab, how inclined is that person going to be to want to buy from you or want to get a mortgage from you? Or if they become a landlord, how likely is it that they're going to come to you with their property? Are they going to want that experience for their tenants? And, you know, I think the good agents have got this for a long time now. You know, the way the experience your tenants have end to end, it lasts, you know, forms a lasting impression of their perception of your brand and its values and everything else. So it's really important to get every part of that journey right. And a huge part of that, some would argue the most important part of that, is the end process, reconciling that deposit and getting that money back to those tenants as quickly as possible. And that's what we're helping agents do. You know, we've just passed 46,000 concluded tenancies.
Wow.
Our agents are averaging deposit returns of around 10 days, which is half the national average. And let's also not forget, if the tenants getting their money back in that time, it also means the landlord's having the money due to them reconciled quicker as well. So everyone's happier.
Everyone's winning.
The property managers are getting that done in half the time. So in half the time, they're crossing that job off their list and moving on to something else. So, you know, we really tried to create a product that really does benefit all three sides of the triangle. The landlord, the agent, and the tenant all come out happier.
Wicked. Kristjan, I've got one last property-related question, and then I've got some quick-fire personal questions. So my last property question is, can I get some lettings property predictions from you, please?
So look, I think I kind of touched on it when we did my very lengthy talks earlier. I think you know, rents are definitely capping off. We're not going to see aggressive rent growth in most parts of the country, because I think fundamentally that's just going to be dictated by affordability. People's salaries aren't fundamentally changing that much. We are kind of at a affordability threshold at the moment, so I think rents are going to be very much dictated by that. I don't think we're seeing any scary exodus of landlords. I think what landlords do leave will be replaced. You know, there's also a lot of landlords leaving the market because they bought 20, 30, 40 years ago. There's a lot of landlords naturally leaving the market that bought property when it was cheap in a much easier lending market. And a lot of those have now realized their returns, and they now want to go into retirement. So, yeah, I think generally stable marketplace with probably, you know, rent increases on average sort of somewhere around 2 or 3% nationally. I think we'll go back to a pretty standard kind of rent increase level. But we'll continue to see the same themes. You know, the lower end of the market will be the most squeezed. Removal of Section 21 will make that worse. The borderline cases, and I think this is, again, I know lots of other people who share this opinion with me. Whenever you tighten regulation, there is always someone who loses out. And one thing that's definitely going to happen is that those kind of borderline tenants who are borderline affordability, or maybe they've got an unusual work structure, or, you know, they're a single parent, or whatever challenges they're facing. Unfortunately, what we will see happen is when Section 21 goes, we will see agents and landlords alike be very more risk averse with those tenants, and those tenants will get turned away and turned down for properties more often. Which again is something that we warned the last government, and we're warning this government about the unintended consequences of, like I said, tightening the belt too much. But by and large, I think the PRS is just going to keep rolling along as it is. Nothing fundamentally is going to really change dramatically either way.
Kristjan, appreciate that, and I want to ask you some of the sort of personal quick fires. Which
I'll try and keep these ones short. I know I'm giving you very long, waffly answers for every question you ask.
It's fine. No, it's good. I want you know, I want the listeners to be able to understand things. So it's no problem at all, and I'm pleased that you've given such in-depth answers. It's just obviously these are a bit shorter. So, what have you learned from being in this field that people should know?
I think probably my biggest guiding principle in 20 years of running base is really just trying to see things from other people's sides. So, you know, trying to see the experience your landlord is having from their side. Look at how and why you do things as a business, and if you were your client, how would you feel about that? How would you take that? Reading that clause or having that imposed on you, how would you feel? And likewise with a tenant, a lot of the things we've done over the years has just been about, you know, improving that tenant experience. So, I mean, one thing that we've done now for 12 years, we started it in 2012, is when an appliance breaks down in a tenant's flat, let's say a tenant calls in to say their fridge is broken down, we keep a stock of appliances. The very first thing we do is stick a fridge and an Uber to that flat. Because that fridge, I think, cost us 150, 200 quid to buy when we first bought it. We've had that for 10 years. But for our tenants,
it's a great piece of advice.
And be thinking like, oh, Christ, what am I going to do about the food in my fridge? What happens if it all defrosts? Am I going to get that back? When is this going to be fixed? I've got friends coming around for dinner in 2 nights' time. Whatever it is that's going through their mind, to instantly take away all that stress by going, guys, don't worry about it. There's a fridge in a taxi on its way to you, be with you in half an hour, and that is yours until we've sorted your fridge permanently. And it also gives you, often when you benefit one, you benefit another. So we came up with that idea primarily so that tenants were serviced. But what we realized is that by doing that, we're servicing our landlords because it takes the pressure off them. You now don't have a tenant screaming down the phone or sending angry emails about what's happening about the 200 quid's worth of food they had in the freezer that's just all defrosted. And it takes the pressure off the landlord, allowing them a little bit more time to make a slightly more considered and hopefully effective decision on resolving that issue. So yeah, I think just my thing is just put yourself in the person's shoes. If it was you experiencing that incident, that service, that whatever, that issue, how would you feel about it? And is there a way you can solve it? Can you prevent that even happening?
Kristjan, do you know one I want to add for you that I heard you say earlier that I think is fantastic and I absolutely love it is the one-to-one yearly review in terms of what you love, what you hate, and then the annual team getting together with the findings. I think for me, when I heard you say that, I thought, that's fantastic. And I think more businesses should adopt that. So that's one I would like to add on your behalf without asking, that one thing that people could learn that you've learned from being in the sector that people should know. So there's two, they're both from you, but one's from me through you. And
for that one, just to say, we do that all as one thing. We do that all in one day. So we would typically, the team start their day, clear their emails, and then 11 o'clock, we start sitting down having one-to-ones with the team, and we will sit down and have a one-to-one with each individual member. And then literally straight off the back of that, usually Anne and I will sit down and kind of collate what we've learned from those one-to-ones. And then we go straight into a team meeting. And then we raise with the team, guys, these are the 3, 4, 5, 6 kind of themes that have come to us out of the one-to-one chats. Let's talk about them as a group and agree what we're going to tackle, because you're not going to tackle 6 things, right? You might work your way through a list of 6 things, but you're not going to tackle 6 things straight away. So, and then you bring the team on board, and then it's the team that, and there's some really healthy conversations that come out of that, and also new learnings. We've had those conversations before where we'll have a team member go, I had no idea that you felt about that when that lands on your desk. Would it help you if I did this, this, and this before I handed it over to you? And people are like, oh my God, that would change my life. And so again, it just helps everyone on the team understand. And we've got a small team, we're a team of 7 people. We're not 100 or 700 people sat around loads of offices. So yeah, I think it's a really healthy thing to do. But job satisfaction is huge,
I agree. And what's your favorite thing about what you do?
Do you know what? The people. I really like, I really come to like, it's the interaction of people, and that is really in the absolute broad sense, from engaging with our team and the team we've built and the style of agency we've built. We very much do things our own way. I'm very, very proud of that. The relationships that we have with our landlords, that definitely merge that kind of professional and personal. I mean, particularly my business partner, Anne. I mean, my God, she probably knows about 20 private life facts about every single landlord on our books. Just like a Pandora's box of secrets. And then more broadly, and this is something that I think has developed more over the last decade than over my whole time in the industry, but the industry as a whole, we've become a lot more open. I remember when we came into the industry, there was a lot of bravado and a lot of bullshit, and there was a lot of agents giving it the big I am and puffing out their chest, and bragging about a lot of crap, whilst knowing that they weren't doing the figures they were saying and weren't delivering the service they would like to. And what I love now is we've become such an open industry now. You can call up, 50, 100 agents across the country, from independents to corporates. If you're, whether you're an agency owner, an employee, someone coming into the sector, and you can say, look, I'd really like 5 minutes of your time to talk about this, or I was wondering if I could come and spend an hour with you or your team, or a half day with your team, and you'll be welcome and pretty much open doors. I think providing you're not planning on opening a rival agency literally next door and gouging their market. I think our industry has evolved enormously, and there's this really lovely. It's a proper industry. It's a proper profession. We support one another. We knowledge share. We help each other out in the tough times, and we help each other. We share ideas and knowledge and learnings, and I think that's really exciting. And that change in the industry for me has been one of the biggest things. I think coming into agency, I very much saw this as something that I was going to do as kind of a quick journey to then move on to whatever then my next step as a kind of entrepreneur was going to be. I didn't actually expect to kind of fall in love with the industry as much as I have, and to become as proud of it as I have become. So yeah, definitely the people.
Wicked. And my last question, Kristjan, is who's the most influential person in your life, and how did they impact you?
Oh, that's not fair. I mean, I'd probably have to say my mother-in-law is waving and giving me the eyeballs from behind the laptop. So my mother-in-law transformed my life is really what the answer to that one is. Oh God, I mean, look, I think the obvious one is my work wife, is Anne. We've been on an incredible journey together. Quite literally, I mean, when that woman first met me, she hated me. She thought I was a complete shithead and really arrogant. And yeah, we went through that to form a friendship, and we've been building businesses for 20 years together now.
Yeah.
And so I think, yeah, in that respect, definitely, absolutely her. But obviously, the support of my wife and family. And as I touched on before, this incredible community of agents we've got. Yep. I mean, my God, I'm slightly scared to start listing people, because if I do, I'm slightly worried I'll forget people. But, the likes of Vicky Babiris and Spencer Lawrence and the inimitable Simon Whale, the Tom McGee's of this world, the Harry Trumans, the, Megan 18s. I could go on. Everyone who I haven't mentioned, don't worry, you're on that list. But you know who you are. But yeah, I mean, obviously the standout would definitely be Anne, though. Our little journey and tussle together, and yeah, I think the fact she's always backed me. With things like Depositary, we never set out to be a software company or software entrepreneurs, so that was a bit left field for me to turn around to her a few years ago and go, come on, let's do this, and let's not use other people's money, let's do it with all of our own. Yeah, I think that took a lot, and that's when you're someone like me who's an ideas person, you need someone who's willing to. Not that she carte blanche just lets me do whatever I want. I can categorically say she absolutely doesn't do that. But someone who's willing to back you and go, do you know what? You want to do it? Let's do it. I think that's incredibly powerful and incredibly important as an entrepreneur, to have someone who's willing to back you and your ideas.
Wicked. Kristjan, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for sharing everything with us. And thank you for taking the time out. I do appreciate it.
Dude, absolute pleasure. Thanks for having me. All right. Talk soon, buddy.